A stranger's number flashed on my phone screen. "This is Ava speaking." I picked it up while continued my grocery shopping. There was a beat of silence before I heard a familiar voice. "You deleted my number?" It was him, Ethan. My stomach twisted. Without a word, I hung up. I'd loved Ethan for years. Every time he called, I would go to him, no matter the time, no matter how many times he had hurt me. We spent countless nights together, him holding me close and whispering that he loved me as the moonlight filtered through the blinds. But mornings were different. He'd be cold, distant, sometimes leaving without a word. I'd wake up to find him scrolling through his phone, a lazy smirk on his face as he messaged other girls. "It's nothing serious," he'd say when he caught me looking. "Just messing around." I never argued. I would sit quietly, pretending not to see, pretending it didn't hurt. I convinced myself that if I stayed long enough, if I was patient enough, he would realize I was the one he wanted. Sometimes he'd disappear for weeks without a word, leaving me to wonder if he'd found someone else. I'd lie awake at night staring at my phone, hoping he'd text or call. My mind would spin with anxiety, and I'd start second-guessing every moment we'd spent together. Had I said something wrong? Done something to drive him away? But then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, he'd show up out of the blue, knocking on my door with that crooked smile that made my heart race. "Miss me?" he'd ask, and I'd melt, letting him in without a second thought. Every time he returned, I told myself that it was proof he needed me, that he couldn't stay away. Yet as soon as he got what he wanted, he'd push me away again. There was the time we had planned a weekend getaway together, the first time he'd ever suggested doing something like that. I was so excited, packing and repacking my bag, making sure everything was perfect. But the night before we were supposed to leave, he canceled. "Something came up," he said casually over the phone. "We'll go another time." I tried to hide my disappointment, but he must have heard it in my voice. "Don't be so dramatic, Ava," he snapped, his tone sharp and impatient. "It's not a big deal." I hung up and cried myself to sleep, but when he called a week later asking me to come over, I went. I always went. Then there were the times he'd invite me out with his friends. At first, I'd be thrilled, thinking it meant I was a real part of his life. But he'd ignore me all night, flirting with other women right in front of me. If I got upset, he'd laugh it off, calling me jealous and insecure. "It's just fun," he'd say. "Why do you always have to make everything so serious?" But the worst were the times he said he loved me. It was always late at night after we'd been together, when he was half asleep and the darkness hid the coldness in his eyes. "I love you, Ava," he'd murmur, pulling me closer, his breath warm against my skin. In those moments I believed him. I'd cling to those words like they were a lifeline, replaying them in my mind over and over, trying to convince myself they were true. Yet by morning he was a different person. He'd get out of bed without waking me, shower, and leave without saying goodbye. Sometimes I'd wake up to the sound of the door clicking shut behind him, the sheets still warm from where he'd slept. Other times I'd find a hastily scribbled note. "Had to go. See you later." There was always an excuse, always a reason why he couldn't stay. And I would wait for the next time he called, the next time he said he needed me, because even though I knew he was using me, a part of me couldn't let go of the hope that he might one day love me the way I loved him. So I kept going back. I accepted the scraps he offered, convincing myself they were enough because I didn't know how to stop loving him. It was a vicious cycle, and I let it break me piece by piece until there was almost nothing of myself left. Everything shattered one night when, after we spent the night together, he sat up in bed, lit a cigarette, and said casually, "I'm getting married next month." My heart stopped. "What about me?" I asked, my voice breaking. He just chuckled, brushing his fingers through my hair. "We can still be like this. Nothing has to change." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. But when he left that morning, I knew it was the end. I packed up the little things that made me feel like we had a life together. Matching pajamas, his favorite brand of coffee, the slippers I'd bought us. There wasn't much. We never truly lived together, but those things had given me comfort, a sense of belonging. This time I was done. I deleted his number, blocked him everywhere, and left the city. I flew back to my hometown, a smaller, quieter place filled with family and friends who genuinely cared. It was time to find a version of myself that didn't revolve around him. At first, Ethan's messages were irritated and demanding. "Why are you ignoring me?" he texted the first week after I left. "Stop playing games, Ava. This isn't funny." I didn't respond and the texts kept coming. A few days later he left a voicemail, his tone cold and impatient. "Okay, so you're mad. I get it. But this whole silent treatment thing is childish. Just call me back and we can talk about it." He still didn't get it. In his mind, I was throwing a tantrum and would come crawling back like I always did. I had done that for years after all. Weeks went by and he called every other night. His messages took on a mocking edge as if he couldn't believe I was serious. "Wow, you're really committed to this, huh? What, do you think ignoring me will make me chase you? Nice try." I deleted every message without reading them all the way through. Then one night my phone rang again, his number flashing on the screen. I stared at it for a moment, then hit decline. Seconds later he texted *, "You're acting so dramatic. We both know you can't stay mad forever. Just come home already." It was the last time I saw his name on my screen. I changed my number the next day. For the first few weeks he assumed I would give in. He'd spent years treating my love as a certainty, something he could pick up and put down whenever it suited him. It was always on his terms. But when he tried to contact me through our mutual friends and got no response, something shifted. One evening, I was sitting on my parents' porch with a cup of tea when my childhood friend Callie came rushing up the steps, holding out her phone. "Ethan just called me," she said breathlessly. "He's different, Ava. He's panicking." "What did he say?" I asked, though my heart was already hardening. "He asked if I'd seen you," she said. "He sounded desperate. He kept saying he had to talk to you, that there was some huge misunderstanding." I didn't believe it. I shook my head, passing the phone back to Callie. "If he wants to talk to me so badly, he can fly out here himself. But I doubt he'll bother." I was wrong. Just a week later he showed up on my doorstep. I opened the door to find him standing there, looking disheveled in a way I'd never seen before. His hair was a mess, his eyes red-rimmed, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. For a moment I felt the old ache tug at my heart, the temptation to reach out and comfort him, but I kept my expression neutral. "Ava," he said, his voice breaking. "Why won't you just answer me? Why did you leave without saying anything?" "I did say something," I replied calmly. "I told you congratulations on your wedding." He flinched. "I called it off," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I was stupid. I thought you'd still be there. I don't want to get married. I just want you." I crossed my arms, my resolve firm. "You don't get it, do you? For years I let you treat me like an afterthought. Like I didn't matter unless it was convenient for you." His face fell, but he tried to laugh it off. "You're just angry. I know you still love me, Ava. We can go back to the way things were. Just come with me." "No," I said, my voice steady. "We can't go back. I'm not the same person anymore. And I deserve more than what you were ever willing to give." He reached for my hand, but I stepped back. For the first time he looked genuinely frightened. "Please," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll do anything. I don't care about anyone else. I just want you." I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of peace. "You wanted me when it was easy, Ethan. But I want someone who loves me all the time, not just in the dark." He tried a few more times after that, calling mutual friends, showing up at places he thought I might be, sending gifts to my parents' house. But I never responded. Over time, the calls stopped, and his presence faded from my life like a distant, bittersweet memory. Back home I started to rebuild. I found a job as a librarian, volunteered at the local animal shelter, and reconnected with childhood friends. I went to concerts, took long walks, and started to love myself in a way I never had when I was with him. Our mutual friend told me he stayed single for years after. But by then it didn't matter. I was living my own life, one filled with real love, laughter, and the kind of happiness I'd never known with him.